Welcome to Ecofeminism. I'm Rachel Hudson. Now, this might be possibly the worst moment to realize that I, in fact, have a ring light and probably should be using it because my kind of office space here gets to pretty dark. And I don't know, maybe it's nice to see my face. I say that it's the worst possible week because whatever is in my area feels like it's kind of just punching me right through the cavities here. So yeah, I guess we'll see how it goes. Now, this week in ecofeminism, we are talking about power, science, and globalization. I just put the link to the written module in the chat. If you have interest in following along, excuse me. Now, this week we're taking kind of a different, like a slightly different view, I guess is what I should say, from what we have been the last several weeks. Because we're really going to be spending our time this week and also next week, which is our second to last week together, talking about spirituality and community as a way to build something a little bit more holistic. But first, as ever, a little bit of housekeeping. If you are only here at the moment in time that you are here because you want to comment on what a woman on the internet looks like, I already know. You don't need to say anything. But if you are here to discuss and to learn 100% what we're about here. Now, as a friendly reminder, there is a syllabus for the course, and it's a publicly accessible Google Doc, and I'm going to put the link to that in the chat as well. But you can also click on it. Excuse me. Within the written module, and then finally, while of course I'm happy to be doing this for free, good, I just love doing it. It does also take a lot of time, and so if you wanted to support this, like me and this space financially, you can purchase all of the books that we talk about in my Linktree shop. Of course, all of the content is also freely available on the internet, but and most of this stuff is stuff that I have digitally, but I'm a gal who likes like physical media. It's very millennial of me, I guess. Anyway, and if you purchase, but anyway, to get back on track, little sales pitchy, if you purchase any of those books through my Linktree shop, I do get a small commission at no extra cost to you, and that can be super helpful. And now we're kind of bopping right on into the meat of what we're talking about this week. Hi, forgive me, I just realized I didn't actually fill up my water bottle before we got started. So hopefully that doesn't go really poorly for all of us. Now we're starting out with actually two essays, part one and part two of The Other Half of History, both written by Riane Eisler. And she really stops us with something I think deserves our consideration. And that is that in the cultural context that we live in, there's not really a clean word for the opposite of patriarchy. And what we mean by that is that when we think about matriarchy, we're normally thinking about really like the same shape as patriarchy, but with different people at the top rather than fundamentally changing the social system that we live in. And if you wanted to see kind of an example of that, maybe not necessarily that you want to, but if you did, there's a novel, and I'm looking at it at my own bookshelf right now, which is why I'm kind of weirdly off to the side here. It's called The Power by Naomi Alderman. I'll be honest, it's something that I read when it came out, because Barack Obama recommended it, and he is the person that I appreciate as a scholar and as a policymaker. I did not like this book. But if you want a good example of what a matriarchy can look like when it's just patriarchy flipped, that could be a good novel for you to read. But Eisler, within the context of talking about the other half of history, she makes her own vocabulary, which I think is something that's really beautiful about the English language. And she and she describes, rule by force as androcracy, and then kind of more community building as gylany. And then kind of using that framework of linking rather than ranking, she starts to look for gylany's fingertips across two civilizations that we think we already know about. Her case study is ancient Greece. And I promise I'm not bringing this up because of its the very recent virality of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. It's just a good case study in this example. And it's a good one because we're familiar with it, right? When we are learning about ancient Greece, we really are learning about all the fellows, right? Pythagoras, Socrates, etc. We know all about those guys, right? Like kind of within the frameworks that we've been taught, without really talking about the women, which I find to be really kind of interesting. And just to myself, because some of my favorite ancient Greek stories are the ones with the women in them. Not surprising if you've been around here for a while. But as we're looking at this, Eisler is also looking at kind of the historical communities around ancient Greece, for that more gylanic social model. And she's looking at the Minoans, and she's and then kind of the Neolithic substrate that's underneath them that never really disappeared, right? It was just built on. So we kind of get the opportunity to think about this ancient society, and societies adjacent, again, as more community building rather than militaristic in nature. And then she does something that I find to be really, really interesting here. And that is that she takes a very similar approach in part 2 of the essay to Jesus, And I particularly find this to be interesting as somebody who was like raised within Christianity, but also as somebody who just in my own life as a personal human tries to kind of strip away some of the more challenging components of religious traditions to maybe try to conceptualize something a little more pure, and to understand how we got where we were. And as a percentage, of course, globally, most people identify with some sort of a Christian denomination. And so I think this applies to a lot of people. And when you look at somebody like Jesus, you get a rabbi who talks to women in public and shows himself to women in a way that is extremely meaningful. Right? Even if you want to talk about the resurrection of Christ, the first person that he sees is a woman. And I'm going a little off the rails here. I promise I'm going to bring it back to ecofeminism. There are scholars out there, and I have an interest in religion. I'm not a religious scholar, but there's scholars out there that suggest that Mary Magdalene, who is the first who saw him when he was resurrected, the reason that he showed himself to her in that way is because they were actually married to each other. And I find that to be just really interesting to think about. But then also to think about that in a way, as we've been talking about a little bit these past few weeks, how there's a really good possibility that the ancient world viewed and treated women very differently from how we do now, but that the people who are in power really kind of stripped a lot of that away and added in a bunch of pomp and circumstance and rigmarole to make association with women unholy instead of holy. But really, like, as we're kind of going through all of this, whether we're taking a society that we're familiar with or a religious framework that we're familiar with, what we really are left with is that we have a ton of ancient societies that were peaceful and goddess worshiping. And that might not be totally true, but it does really invite us to start thinking about erasure as a mechanism for promoting a specific narrative and type of control, and then omitting women from like any of these conversations isn't a neutral move on the part of the powerful. It's really how that ranking that I talked about kind of at the beginning continues to be maintained. Right, and we're coming in here to our second reading of the week, called The Juice and the Mystery by Margot Adler. This particular reading, thankfully for all of us, is not quite as heavy of a lift. which is nice. The other half of history was, I think, a lot for all of us. And really kind of brings us back into ecofeminism, which, right, that's why we're all here. At least this time, that's why we're all here. And I want to kind of just stop to acknowledge, very specifically why we're having this faith conversation and community conversation in an ecofeminist class. And it's because our faith or our spiritual traditions really significantly inform our relationship to the natural world. And that is really due to, as I mentioned before, thousands of years of very effective storytelling. But the juice and the mystery kind of gives us this opportunity to think about a spiritual practice in a very different way, by inviting us to think about neopaganism. And very specifically that within pagan traditions and neopagan traditions, the ritual ultimately is what is important here. And very specifically that even if you don't fully believe in like any kind of a supernatural power, it's those rituals, which are very often earth-based or nature-based, connect us to our community in very deep and meaningful ways. And so I would really kind of just touching on this a little bit, but I would invite us to consider how, just need to turn this back on, I think, how our spiritual practices and faith traditions actually, I think the battery just ran out. So, that's just how that goes down sometimes. Anyway, forgive me for sidetracking myself, but how we can bring principles of diversity and ecstasy. And if you want to nerd out and read a little bit about J.R.R. Tolkien, he has a lot to say about that. But to bring those things into our spiritual practice in a way that builds a holistic and meaningful community. And now this brings us into our last reading, which is, excuse me, from Feminist Earth-Based Spirituality and Ecofeminism by Starhawk. Sorry, I don't know why I do this to myself. Often on Wednesday evenings, I end up having chili for dinner, and then I regret it when I'm here live with all of you. Maybe more than you wanted to know about me, but I'm a little messy today, so this is what you're getting. Now, Starhawk really invites us to think about the paths that we take and our practices or rituals that bring us into community with each other. And also to think about where community is, and I quote, a place we can identify the vice of self-interest and resist its control. And that really is ultimately the point, right, of community, that to live in a space where we are taking care of course, but also where we are very specifically caring for others. And that we can do those things by engaging in active listening exercise, or doing things like consciousness raising rounds, brainstorming, feeling sharing rounds, self-criticism with response, group bonding exercises, and then also engaging in consensus decision making. Because it's really through kind of these categories of activities that we strengthen our ability to be together, even through conflict, and to create this environment, both like within ourselves and within our communities and the natural world, to be better. Now that is in fact all that I have for you this week. So thank you so much for joining me in all of this to talk about community building. Now I am very much looking forward to being in your inbox again, as ever, looking at the calendar, on Sunday, August 9th. And back here live with you next Wednesday evening, August 12th. I hope you have a great week, and I hope that you can take some time to engage in community with yourself and with those around you.